Hello and welcome to Own Your Health with me, Katie Brindle. I'm really excited about today's episode because we're going to talk today about the role of the matriarch. Now, you might be thinking, what on earth is this? Now, for those of you that listened to the menopause episode, and if you haven't, I suggest you do, but I'll kind of recap anyway, is that one of the things that gets obliterated in the whole issue of the menopausal symptoms, which tend to take centre stage at this point in our lives, is that there is actually an advantage to this process. The problem is that we didn't know about it. Okay, and then the next problem is, the first problem is we didn't know about that it was there at all. And the second problem is there are so many symptoms that we're dealing with that we haven't really got the headspace to think about this kind of good bit that comes with it because we're suffering. So if you're suffering from menopausal symptoms, please go to the menopausal episode because I address it there. Okay, and there is also a whole fact sheet on the menopause and a masterclass. The masterclass is 90 minutes long. I think it was so long we actually then had to do an addendum to it because there was so much really good content there. So I've really covered the menopause off elsewhere. But what I want to talk about today is this other bit, the matriarch bit, which is the good bit, okay? So we can trust that I've addressed the symptom side of things, okay, in other podcasts and other content. So here we are over here with the matriarch. Now, the idea is that as females, there are kind of three archetypes to the female during the course of her life. There is the maiden, which is kind of like our youth. It's kind of the virginity. It's sort of that part of things, which was very much prized because it was our virtue. So sort of tradition, less so now, but traditionally speaking, the virtue of the maiden was absolutely paramount and had to be protected at all possible costs and was only allowed to transform itself into the mother through the course of wedlock, okay, because otherwise that wasn't deemed to be a good thing. And this is all unravelling now, obviously, in the 21st century, but bodies have evolved over thousands of years and society still has got itself but has come out of these entrenched belief systems and therefore is evolving out of it. But we need to pay attention to sort of our history in order to work out where we're coming from. So there we have the maiden at first. She then becomes the mother. The mother doesn't necessarily have to be the actual production of children because not everybody does. But it's that kind of phase in a woman's life where she's menstruating. Okay, and then what happens is you go through the menopause and you become this other thing. Okay, and people didn't know about this bit because she got obliterated in the masculine narrative. So this matriarch part has been somewhat erased out of society, out of the narrative, so much so that we didn't even know she was there. So that's why I wanted to devote today's episode to her, the matriarch, okay? The forgotten archetype of the female, which, believe it or not, in my humble opinion, is actually the best bit. And it is an if, we understand how to honour her correctly. Now, this is a really important thing to be aware of, okay, because the matriarch brings with her so many attributes that just get cast over because society has always been programmed during the course of anyone listening who's kind of come out of the 20th century, which is most of us, out of prizing our youth. And that youth of the female has been the thing that we've been prizing all along, to the point at which we've lied about our age, we're dealing with symptoms of our age, and then we're not understanding the glory of this process where we are in the golden years of our age, which is the matriarch frequency. So the first thing is that the matriarch comes in what we call the second spring. Now, the second spring is the good bit that comes out of the menopause. And as I've said, the menopause symptoms have been addressed elsewhere. So we can go over to those to see that through. Once we get to the position where the symptoms are no longer causing any problems because they don't have to if we understand how to treat them correctly, we can then embrace this good stuff. Now, the first thing about the second spring is that by the cessation of the menstrual flow, we are no longer putting energy into the creation of life, which is a monthly process, all the way through until it stops happening. That creation of life then all of a sudden goes back into our own energy sphere. And whilst our energy spheres might be slightly lessened because we are slightly older, if we understand how to manage them correctly, that beautiful energy goes into this new creative process, which in Chinese medicine practice we call the second spring, i.e. there's a sort of regeneration moment within the woman's body where she can come alive again. Now, I have been through this process. I am bringing you this process, having gone through my second spring and navigated my menopausal symptoms. And I can tell you that once you're doing it, it's great. And there are thousands and thousands of women in my community who have also gone through this themselves and have also gone through this rebirthing and are also saying it's great. Okay, so the thing about it is that the matriarch offers us this opportunity to recreate, because also we not only physically have the capacity to start thinking about a recreation process. What normally happens by the time we get to these older years is that our children, if we've got them, have started to grow up and therefore require less input to little children. I'm not saying that teenagers and adult children don't require a huge amount of input, she says, with personal experience, but it's not like that absolute hands-on exhaustion of small children. And anyone listening to this who either has or has had small children or exposure to them will know how much hands-on that is. And it's very, very tiring indeed. As they get older, I know they still need a lot of emotional support, but it's not quite the same. So we have a little bit more bandwidth to start thinking about ourselves. Because the thing about having that reproductive system is that the body's energy is focused on reproduction. And if that manifests as children, it focuses on the management of those children as well as everything else to do. So all of a sudden, there's a little bit more peace that can come into our world. And the thing about this peace is we need to then use that space to honour ourselves. Now, if you're listening to this and you're thinking, Katie, I don't have any peace at all. I am busy still managing my family. I'm managing my partner. I also may or may not have a job, and I'm managing my elderly parents, and I've got quite a lot on my plate. I understand that too, because actually I've just kind of described my own life as well. But the thing about peace is that it comes in the quiet spaces of our life. And you know what? There are more quiet spaces in our life than we realise. And what I like to talk about honouring the matriarch is allowing her in to those quiet spaces, because as you start to open those quiet spaces up, she will come in, she will bring with her a whole load of other benefits too. One, she brings the opportunity of recreation. Two, she brings the opportunity to start focusing on these tiny little moments of peace and amplifying them. Because there's a dogma in Chinese medicine which says where the attention goes, the energy flows. So therefore, by focusing on these little spaces, we can start to expand them because they're there. We've all made time and space for smartphones. So we can all make time and space for ourselves, even if we're really busy. And I bring this to you as somebody who is really busy, but I do have the power to make these spaces happen in my life, and I have done. So if I can do it, you can do it, because I was just as busy as you were. Then she brings us peace. She then starts to bring us power, because what she has is the power of the greatest attribute that the matriarch has, which is wisdom. Because wisdom is the high virtue of the kidneys. And the kidneys is the organ of the yin, which is the essence of the female. And the wise elder of this yin is the development of wisdom through the experience of her lifespan. Because traditionally, the matriarch was prized because there weren't many of them. So the matriarch often, by the time she had got to that position, would have experienced famine, she would have experienced war, she would have experienced big, bountiful harvests, she would have experienced either childbirth or other people's childbirth, she would have reared children or helped rear other people's children. There is all these incredible life experiences that the matriarch would offer to her community, which unfortunately, as a result of the sort of patriarchal influences in history, has been diminished all the way down to old wives' tales. That's just old wives' tales. So we need to change that very, very offensive expression, and we need to bring it back to actually this is divine feminine wisdom. This is matriarchy in her full glory. So she also brings leadership with that and influence, because with wisdom comes leadership. And I think one of the things that this world needs more than anything right now is wise leadership. I think there are wise leaders out there, and I think there are reckless leaders out there. And one thing that I've observed myself from studying all of this and living in the modern world is that we live as the product of history, as the product of leadership in the past is the good and the bad that we are dealing with now. Bad decisions made in the past have often influenced what's going on in the war right now. Greed, that has existed from power and leadership in the or reckless leadership in the past has created all sorts of suffering and all sorts of hangovers of suffering and abuse that people are having to deal with as a direct result of weak leadership in the past. So one of the things that is so powerful right now is that if women step into their matriarchal power, we can start to lead with influence in a really powerful way. The key to all of this, which is what's so important and actually gently conduits into the importance of the menopausal symptom content, is that what we need to do is, in order to bring through the matriarch, is we need to show ourselves balance and self-preservation. Now, if any of you have watched the film The Substance, which I know has had so much acclaim, I would recommend you do. I think it's a really interesting film and I've watched it a few times now. But one of the things that I've observed from this film is the way that the young self abuses the old self. In the pursuit of the excitement of the youthful self, the old self suffers. And that's a really important narrative in the film because it reflects what we do as society. We prize youth and we do tend to forget about the health of our older selves by basically burning the candles as we're younger and enjoying ourselves in a slightly reckless fashion, which, interestingly, the Taoist masters would always have cautioned us against. And I think this is something that we need to think about as wise matriarchs, in as much as we are therefore living the consequences of reckless behaviour in our youth. Now, the good thing about that is, A, we can caution young people against it now because we can say, look, the menopausal symptoms that we are going through, you will go through if you don't rectify your behaviour right now. Because as that film says, they are one of the same thing. The older self and the younger self are the same. And that is true of all of our bodies. Now, the most important thing, therefore, to do is, having created an imbalance, which in my opinion has been largely as a direct response of the equalisation of the genders that's been going on over the last 100 years and still has about another 25 years to play out. And we have suffered in our health as a direct consequence of that. Now, that's not to say we shouldn't do it. We absolutely must. But the last bit of the process is to understand that we need to balance and harmonise so that we can honour the yin of our bodies. So if you are suffering from menopausal symptoms right now, it will be because your yin has been compromised because of the fact that you have had to survive in a man's world and you've had to work to equalise the process. And yet at the end of the day, your body at the role of the menopause is going into a deeper yin state. So what we need to do is focus on rebalancing that. Now, as I said, the whole of the menopausal content is there to explain that, but this is not about that. This is the matriarch. So what do? Well, we focus on ourselves. And that, I think, is the biggest gift that the matriarch position offers us. Focusing on yourself, which I would expect, and do please put in the comments below if I'm wrong, that you probably haven't been able to do. How much have you been able to focus on yourself during the course of your adult life? I know I haven't. Perhaps to a certain extent with my education, but there's been a huge amount of focus on everybody else. There's been a huge amount of compromise on my part in order to bring up a family and somehow or other try and have a career at the same time. Whereas one would argue that in the mainstream, from a male perspective, it seems to be quite relatively easy for men to have a family and a career. From a female perspective, to me, it seems an awful lot harder, which has meant that I haven't been able to pay much attention to myself as I've paid attention to all those things going on around me. But as the children get older and as my career settles down, I've got a little bit more time to pay attention to me. And therefore, what I'm able to do is start bringing into my day, into these little spaces, practices which will start to develop the peace and the groundedness that the matriarch energy requires and desires, which is breath work, qigong, relaxation, and wisdom practices. Now, wisdom practices, the easiest way to do wisdom practices to start with is journaling. Now, journaling is something which I've put in at level 2 of my 3-step plan, because journaling is a very, very easy way to learn from one's mistakes. And you will make mistakes because you are in Earth School. Earth School is here to help you learn from your mistakes because that's what you're here to do. And remorse, which is the thing that we would feel from making mistakes, is a positive energy frequency because remorse gives you the opportunity to make things right, as opposed to regret, which is a dead energy, which means you can't actually do anything about it. It just stops dead and just sits with you in your energy frequency. Whereas remorse is a positive energy, which enables you to move things through. Now, in the meantime, Qigong, breath work, these self-care practices are so important. So the easiest one to start with is the breathing, because I've said that the matriarch energy does so well coming through in the spaces, okay? In the spaces of your day. Now, you may sit here and you go, I haven't got a minute. Katie, I am absolutely rushed off my feet and I don't have time for anything. And I would agree with you, because I know when I started this practice, I was the same. I still am. But the difference is my life is just as busy as it was. And yet I'm calmer. Okay, well, how does that all work? Because I've focused on the spaces, because there's loads of them. Every single time you breathe, you create space. Every single time you declutter your emotional body, you create space. Every single time you tidy up your house, you create space. Every single time you align yourself to nature, you create space. So there's so much space. So what I like to do is to invite you into that space and understand that that space is there to help you nurture your yin. So the easiest thing in the whole wide world is the breath, because that's space. So breathe in now with me. And now breathe out and notice you're creating space. There's space right there. Linger at the bottom of the breath. Let that space be inside your body. There's the space. And then fill it with breath. Now, you carry on breathing as I'm talking. You carry on breathing in and out, observing the space as you exhale. And you linger at the top and at the bottom of that breath. That is the simplest breath in the world, because you're just breathing consciously, but not even thinking about box breathing or in through the nose or out through the mouth or anything at all. Okay, we're just breathing. Now, with that breath comes conscious thought. And conscious thought is really useful because your mind is your greatest healing tool and your breath is your greatest healing modality. So with that, you just bring the breath in and you think of it as the purest possible thing imaginable. So feel it pure coming in. Feel it fresh and notice it inside your body. Notice where you feel it evaporate. Notice where you feel it ending, and then super emphasize. So now, rather than noticing where it stops, just imagine that it continues, and imagine that that breath is filling every space inside your body, because all of your cells are full of space. Your body is full of spaces, so fill them with this breath. And if you would like to, at this point, add a spiritual practice on top of it, then feel free to add that in too, because then the breath can become divine. And if you don't wish to do so, just think of it as pure oxygen and pure plant force, and that's fine too. Whatever your spiritual belief system is, this is the point at which you bring it in. And therein comes the mind. You open up yourself to spirit, you open up yourself up to nature, or both, or whichever you wish to do, and you bring it in, but you bring it into the space and you encourage it in. And what you will notice, it will start to nurture your yin, because breath nurtures water, and breath is the metal element and water element is the kidneys. So the breath and the lungs nurture the kidneys. It's the easiest way to nurture your yin, which is what you need to be doing as you go into the matriarch zone, because the more you nourish your yin, the better you're going to feel. Once you've got the concept of breathing, the next concept is bringing in the wisdom. So this is where we need to start using any attention that we have, which would be, in its first instance, journaling before sleep. Journaling before sleep is one of the easiest things that you can do. And it's a really, really important self-care practice because it allows you to generate wisdom. Then after that, I would advise you to pursue wisdom keepers. Now, wisdom keepers are anyone from spiritual leaders to influential people of wisdom who you like following, people who've written interesting books, people who've pointed some fantastic things out. I have a list of wisdom keepers that I like to follow, which is available if you email in at ownyourhealth@katiebrindle.com. I can send it back out to you. And it's just a simple list of people, and it's a good place to start. There's also on that list a really good There's also on that list a really good reading list as well of really interesting books that I like to follow as well, which will give you a little bit of a beginning into some of the great wisdom keepers. It's by no means a definitive list, but it's a really good place to start. And then as you go through your matriarch frequency, you can develop your wisdom, because wisdom is the currency of our senior years. Because in our matriarch years, you have to think about what happens next. Now, the key thing to wisdom is that wisdom is the frequency that we take with us. So when we exit this world, according to the Taoist practices, your body goes down into the ground and your spirit goes up into the sky. And the idea is that the lighter the frequency of your spirit, and these are your sort of divine practices, the higher up into the sky you go, because the higher frequencies are higher up, which makes entire sense to me. So the idea is that this wisdom and the learning is key to this vibrational frequency, which is what goes with you when you exit, because none of the rest of it goes. All of these possessions, all of the things that we have, it's just the learning. It's earth school wisdom is what goes with you. And that is the currency that we need to be working on in these senior years. And when you start to practice, it's beautiful. Arguably, it's the most beautiful thing in the world. It's magical and sparkly because it's divine practice. This can present itself in the form of religion, but it can also just form itself in the practice of spirituality and higher self, depending on how you would like to articulate it and how you would like to practice. And it's so helpful. And religions and spiritual practices will be there to help you do this, as well as many, many influential wisdom keepers as well. And all of this will give you the currency that you need in order to navigate these late years. And really the idea at this stage in life is to think about what then comes next, because right now you're in the second spring rebirth. Well, what then happens when you exit that? So as you're busy cultivating wisdom and higher self practices in these in this rebirth moment of your life, where the energy is slightly softer and more tender and therefore more yin in nature and more attuned to these finer frequencies, is that the final exit point of this is when you will exhale your breath for the very last time, and these energy frequencies will ascend, because that's what the spiritual practices from the Taoist masters are saying. And at that point, there is a regenerative, recreative process when all of that wisdom reaccumulates itself into a new format, which at this point in time, the wisdom would be that you either come back in a different format in order to learn the remaining lessons left to go, or you've achieved everything that you needed to learn in this Earth School format, and therefore you're off to the next place. And that's really a matter of personal belief systems. So it's not really for me to say. I'm just putting that one forwards for anyone that finds that interesting. And if you don't like it, that's absolutely fine. Feel free to ignore it. It's just offered in good faith because I find it super interesting. So that's really where the matriarch energy comes in. It's very much also about sustaining and passing energy through knowledge and example down into the other generations of society, which will live beyond your exit from this world, and that really that then leaves the very last bit of where this matriarch frequency ends, which is wisdom creates legacy. And legacy is ultimately what you leave behind for other people to benefit from. And that ultimately is the main aim of the game. We're here to develop ourselves so that we can learn as best we can through the educational system of Earth School, and then ultimately try and make it a better place for everyone else going through the same experience. Because the nicest thing that we can possibly do is try and make it a simpler and easier place for other people to learn the same lessons that possibly we had to suffer by going through. So there was a little introduction onto the matriarch world. I hope you found that interesting. There is a fact sheet on this as well. Thank you so much for joining me today. If you have any questions or you would like any of the fact sheets I'm talking about, most of them on the website. If you can't find what you're looking for, email in at ownyourhealth@katiebrindle.com and we will be delighted to help. Thank you for joining.